Good evening, lovely people. Welcome to an experiment in sight and sound. This is the first episode of the Don't Go Out on the Moors podcast, a podcast where we explore British genre cinema, not just for its cinematic qualities alone, but also as a window into the society in which these films were made. Uh, I am Matthew Kowalski, or as I'm known on another podcast, Professor Matt. And I will be your MC tonight and for the foreseeable future. But as the football club that I root for, our fans so eloquently sing, "You Never Walk Alone." So I am joined by a wonderfully enthusiastic and very, very well qualified cast of characters that will be joining me on this exploration. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves, just going, from left to right? We'll start it with Dina.
Hello, my name is Dina. I'm a friend of Matt's and Paul's. I've met Paul before. Um, I'm a hairdresser, but I went to school for history. I got my bachelor's degree in history, which is how I met Matt and how I'm here now.
Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Hughes. I'm also a friend of Matthew, and I also know Dina and Cam, so I have the pleasure of knowing everyone here. Um, I have my bachelor's degree in history as well, and I also have a master's in history from Temple University. I'm also currently the director of the Delaware County Historical Society,
I
and
fucking student.
yeah, and Matthew's student as well. And yeah, and I also really like movies and culture. So these are the things we study.
And then last but not least, the fourth leg of this chair, a dear, dear friend, a dear friend, comrade who I've got to know over the last couple years through the football pod, the soccer podcast that we're on. Cam, take it away, man.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, my name is Cam. I'm a I'm from Scotland originally, so tonight kind of makes sense for me. I've got so much to talk about. I won't lie. I've got a lot to talk about. But yeah, I majored in government, which obviously I haven't done a good enough job in the past few years. I did go private after public, so but yeah, no, I'm excited for this podcast, and seems like a solid crew, so I'm pumped.
I am so thrilled that we're finally getting a chance to record this. Very briefly, before we get into tonight's film, which by the way is The Flesh and the Fiends from 1960. Uh just a very brief sort of what is our mission statement and why are we doing this? Uh the main reason why we're doing this, well, I will freely say this, I am the catalyst. There are plenty of film podcasts out there. There are plenty of genre film podcasts out there. But we are filling, I think, a void, a space, if you will. Uh, there is, as far as I'm aware, no podcast out there dedicated strictly to British genre cinema. There used to be a podcast, it was pretty good, called 1951 Downplace, which was dedicated to Hammer films, strictly. But they've not been a thing for, geez, about 7 or 8 years now. Uh, so we are in a very real way filling a, space in the podcast universe. And also and all of our backgrounds in some way, shape, or form, history, culture, etc. Uh, as an historian, I find a lot of podcasts sort of nauseating. And the reason I do that is because not that they're necessarily bad, then there are plenty of good ones. And believe me, there will be people that you may know from other film podcasts that occasionally come on this damn thing. But I find that a lot of cinema podcasts the way that they talk about films are either extremely technical, so you have to be like a film school geek to fully appreciate it, or it devolves into what I like to call Jeopardy film history, where it's like cast, crew, and then that's kind of it. As an historian, particularly a cultural historian, I can't watch movies without thinking as films as windows into the societies and the cultures that they were produced in. Film as historical documents. And right, British cinema, and most of the films we're going to cover are probably going to be post World War II. There'll be some from the interwar period, certainly, that we might cover. But, you know, looking at British cinema is looking at Britain in the 20th century, which means you have to interrogate the big themes, the big forces of British history in the 20th century. Stuff like class, which we're going to talk the fuck about tonight, gender, which I think we also need to talk about tonight, race and ethnicity. Uh, our protagonists, or at least two of them, are Irish. So and right, Britain is not just England, guys. Britain had an empire, but the empire started at home. So, we're going to Scotland today. Empire, decolonization, right? Because by the end of the 1970s, most of the British Empire, not all of it, Ulster, is sort of gone. Consumption, consumerism, industrialization, trauma, right? Because Britain has an empire, it loses its empire. So what does that mean? And right, two fuck world wars happen, and one World Cup, as England fans will remind you. But that's neither here nor there. So we're gonna, and Cam is laughing, we're gonna use these films as a way to interrogate the society in which they were produced in. And I think genre cinema is a good way to do that because mainstream cinema usually runs with mainstream narratives. Genre cinema, be it horror, sci-fi, westerns, stuff that's not necessarily mainstream off kilter, these are the films that I find that societies use to talk about the shit that's really important, but that no one actually wants to talk about. And so the way that I envision this podcast is to do just that. Yes, we're going to talk about production values, we're going to talk about performances, etc. But we're also going to use the films to interrogate and examine the worlds in which they were made. Uh, we had a long-winded discussion before we recorded the first podcast about what constituted genre cinema. And we could go through that for 20 minutes here tonight and bore the crap out of you and make this entirely too long. We're not going to do that. I was debating, sort of giving you a definition, but I had an epiphany on Saturday. Excuse me, Friday, last Friday. Uh, those all of you here, Paul, Dina, Cam, I'm sure you've been here. You ever have like a Friday night and it's kind of getting late, maybe your partner's a little sleepy, mine was. And but you've maybe like eaten a little bit of weed, smoked a joint, maybe had a couple beers, and you were like, nah, I'm gonna stay up and drink some more beer and I'm gonna get on my computer and I'm gonna get on YouTube. And then all of a sudden you're in a goddamn rabbit hole, like a different universe. So I got into that universe last Friday and I stumbled upon an interview with one of my favorite directors, Alex Cox, who did Repro Man, Sid and Nancy, Walker, which is a stupidly underrated film. Uh, and back in the 90s, he hosted a little show on BBC Two. Cam, your parents probably definitely remember it. You may even vaguely remember it, called Movie Drum, where he would introduce once a week, for lack of a better term, a genre or cult film. Films that were off kilter, not mainstream. I think the first episode was The Wicker Man, which was the first time The Wicker Man ever got screened on British television. Films that were sort of disrespected at the time they came out, but then gained a different reputation. And right, Videodrome was cool because this is when the BBC actually was public broadcasting and like they gave us shit about like, expanding ordinary people's cultural horizons. But it was also kind of cool because it was part that, part, social criticism of the films, right? Because Alex Cox, he wears the red underpants just like me and most of us on this podcast. So he would show these weird films and look at them in a slightly different way. And I went bingo. I was like, the films that we are going to examine are kind of the films that they showed on Movie Drone. Films that aren't mainstream, but also films that don't straight up suck. Like audience, my dear audience, we will never show the British equivalent of Manos, The Hands of Fucking Fate. We're not going to do that. We're not going to show deliberately terrible movies. Some of these movies might not be necessarily good, but they're not just going to be like Plan 9 from Outer Space, terrible for terrible sake, and that's ironic. These are films that are kind of under the radar. Some of them have become classics in their own right, but films that are not necessarily mainstream, but nevertheless are important in one way, shape, or form, that they have value. So, without further ado, does anyone want to add anything to that definition of what defines cult, or, who we are, what we're about? Well, I guess not. I guess I do a very good job at what I do.
I was
Anyway,
going to say
oh,
you did a fantastic job there, Professor Matt. You did a fantastic job. I think you're absolutely right. I think I'm really excited for this because it not only gives me the opportunity to explore films I haven't seen, but films that I saw when I was like, 8, 10 years old back home in the UK and watched. I didn't understand at that point in time, and now I get to rewatch them. And there's a significant meaning to these, like I guess what people call like B films, like which is a really, to be honest, shit way to describe them, but B films sort of thing. Yeah, I'm super excited for this, and I think we've got a good track going on here.
all right. So let's get into the heart of it. The film that we are going to talk about tonight is 1960s The Flesh and Fiends, directed by John Gilliam, uh, and starring Peter Cushing, and we all know Peter Cushing, and Donald Pleasance in a role that I think, if you just think of Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis from the Halloween films, you should check yourself, at least you wreck yourself. The guy was a versatile actor. And the film is based around a series of actual events that have their own interesting little history. Events that occurred in Cam's hometown of Edinburgh. Uh, in 1828, two Irish immigrants by the name of William Burke and William Hare, which is kind of crazy that they both had the same surname. Have any of you guys ever watched that crazy show, Terror in the Woods? Shows up on the Travel Channel every now and again.
No.
Oh, you really should. It's fucking psychotic. And there's one episode which makes me laugh. It's so the episode's usually split up and it's like two different stories. And the first story was something called Bat Squatch. Uh don't get into it. But anyway, the guy who claims to have seen Bat Squatch, they were up in their deer stand, and he's like, I was hunting with my brother Daryl and my other brother Daryl. Uh, so it's like William Hare, William Burke. Okay, my brother Daryl, my other brother Daryl. In 1828 in Edinburgh, these two Irish immigrants killed at least 16 people. That's the confirmed number. They may have killed more, we don't know, to sell the bodies as anatomy subjects to Dr. Robert Knox, who was a good way to put it is the rock star professor of anatomy at Edinburgh's School of Medicine. Uh,
Yes, for your awareness, Edinburgh, essentially medical college is one of the best in the world. And he was kind of one of the guys that started it, but kind of to your point, and I'll let you continue. It was almost because of this situation that it became one of the best colleges in the world for medicine.
So in my notes in this sort of section about the actual Burke and Hare, I have down here Edinburgh presented a perfect storm. And I think that's a good way to sort of look at this. You have two things going on simultaneously. You have the birth of what we would call modern or professional medicine, right? And University of Edinburgh is the tip of the spear of that. Uh, but you also have the Industrial Revolution. And indeed, in the film, they kind of make reference to some of this, right? The digging of the Catalonian Canal, which was part of this process. And, as I tell my, sections constantly, when I'm teaching, capitalism and particularly industrial capitalism creates wealth, but it creates wealth unequally. So you have this, state of the art, cutting edge medical institution, but you also have in the same city abject poverty, right, and this burgeoning sort of Scottish working class, and also mass immigration and labor migration, right, because the core, you know, exploits the rural periphery for raw materials and cheap labor from the Highlands but also from Ireland. And so I have this mass of Catholic Irish immigrants pouring into the city. So you have on the one hand, the University of Edinburgh, on the one hand, the sort of slums where these desperate, in many cases, new arrivals uh, inhabit. And right, medical science is, even in the early 19th century, sort of at its infancy. And in order to teach medicine, you need you need bodies, you need subjects to dissect and teach. By the time you get to the 1820s, you have an issue because the subjects for dissection were executed prisoners, right? Suicide victims and orphans. So let's keep it real. It's the poor. But by the time you get to the 1820s, the demand has outrun the supply. And you have a phenomenon that doesn't just occur in Scotland, but occurs throughout the UK. Even in America, this was a thing as well. The phenomenon of the resurrection men or the resurrectionists, which is just a highfalutin term for body snatcher. And this was by the early 19th century kind of almost like a multi-million-dollar industry. If you were poor and desperate, and there are a lot of poor and desperate people at this time, digging up corpses and selling them to medical students, doctors, etc., that was a good way to make a living.
Yeah.
To the point that, and you see this a little bit in the film, by the time you got to the 1820s, you had fixed rates for corpses, right? It
Yeah.
was it was £8 a corpse if you brought it in the summer because the conditions, the body wouldn't be in great shape. It was underground for
Right.
just a year or
Yeah.
two.
It'd be in
Uh
the ground for a few months sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Precisely. Whereas if you brought in a body during the winter, it was £10 because the body was in better condition because of the climate. And to just give you guys a sense of the extent of this, uh, in Glasgow, militant opposition of citizens versus surgeons, right? Because everyone knew this was going on. Uh, and students produced a series of clashes leading to a storm that raged throughout 1813 and 1814. So, quite literally 15 years before these events, there's a series of riots because ordinary people are terrified that
Yeah.
the doctors are quite literally feasting on your dead relatives. Right. But in 1825 in Portsmouth, police arrested a London gang that had been robbing the Royal Naval Hospital burial grounds in Halifax. So you had this gang in London, this organized criminals, digging up bodies from this naval hospital to sell. In 1826, uh, in Liverpool, three casks bound for Edinburgh were found to contain human bodies. The next year in Dublin, a ship was delayed on its way to Liverpool and arrived in the port so aromatic that it was almost unnecessary for the customs officers to open the box and declare that it contained the bodies of dead men.
Oh, you shouldn't laugh at that, but that is
It's
fucking ridiculous.
but
That is
this
ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
this was this
Yeah.
at the time, and Edinburgh in particular, again, it's sort of this perfect storm. You have the premier medical college, not just in the United Kingdom,
Well,
but
there's an aspect to the culture here that I think people should understand. We had at that point in time when Medical Edinburgh College was essentially the premier college for surgery, for medicine. Um, I mean, they like they needed the essentials, quote unquote. Let's put it that way. And it seems really dark. I was an EMT for 15 years, so I always keep it dark. Um, but these two guys, like, they found a way to essentially say, shit, we can make a few pennies off this. Um, and it's a weird contradiction because most cultures would be like, why would we celebrate gravediggers? But Scotland, in its fantastic fashion, said, you know what? They created their own way to deal with this. These people are dead. Like, they're not going to miss their own bodies, sort of thing. Like, it's such a, I'm always torn between it, but at the end of the day, I always
well,
rely on the fact that kind of, I mean, smart. Like,
I think it speaks to, again, this sort of perfect storm because you have, and look, Cam, you're from Edinburgh, so you know this because there's a class aspect here. There's also kind of, dare
there
I say,
is,
there's also a
yeah,
sectarian aspect, right? Because most of these
a
resurrectionists
little bit,
in
yeah.
Edinburgh at the time have names like Murphy and O'Toole, right? Because
Yep.
who's inhabiting these slums? So effectively, you have a situation, and those of you who aren't aware of Scottish soccer, in almost every Scottish city, there's a rivalry between the Protestant team, which is usually supported by upper class sort of they're the bougie team, and a working class team.
The people that want immigrants out usually,
Yeah,
yeah,
see, yeah,
yeah.
the BNP
If I'm
people,
being honest, if
uh,
I'm being straight up honest, like, yeah.
and a club supported by usually the descendants of Irish Catholic working class immigrants. In this case, we have a situation where the Hibs fans, the club's called Hibernian, the Roman word for Ireland. Uh, the Hibs fans dig up dead people to sell to the Hearts, that's the Protestant upper class club, uh the Hearts fans. And these two things are feed each other in a very real way. What made Burke and Hare, I guess, infamous was that, in the words of historian Tim Marshall, they just took grave digging to its logical conclusion.
Well, I think at the end of the day it was very class. I don't think it was sectarian whatsoever. At the end of the day, I think it was very class. Like, and it's also it plays into this like this mentality that Scots have that we're inventive with something.
Well, yeah, they
So
certainly.
like a couple of poor guys that live in Edinburgh are like, you know what? I could make some good money off doing this. It's kind
Yeah,
of messed up, but
in the words of Tim Marshall, Burke and Hare took grave robbing to its logical conclusion. Instead of digging up dead people, They accepted the lucrative initiatives to destroy the living. And
And you know what?
when you kill the people, you're gonna get 10 pounds.
Well, the best part about it was they did so much like fucked up shit, and Scotland like holds them off, and that says something about our culture. And I don't think it's necessarily negative. I think there is a negative part to it, but I think there's
Don't
that
say.
as I think there's that aspect of like these were guys that were like so desperate and they figured out a way to do this. And we've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of inventors, and our country just seems to have that aspect of like coming up with something when you've got nothing. So
Well, and if you know anything, not just about Scottish culture, but also the Scottish Enlightenment, it's very focused on, and we'll talk a little bit about the Enlightenment when we talk about Dr. Knox and Cushing in the film itself. It's also this very sort of it's where modern business and finance effectively comes together
mm,
in a really
yeah,
warped way, and I think this is maybe something we want to talk about in the film.
yeah,
Burke and Hare are murdering bastards. However, they are also entrepreneurs in a very, very, very dark way. Uh,
yeah.
they are entrepreneurs. Needless to say, after 16 dead people, they get caught because they screw up, and the film is actually quite accurate there. Uh, Hare turns King's evidence, so he does.
Bart gets hanged. Yeah,
Burke gets hanged. The
yeah.
film is slightly, this is where the film is a little historically inaccurate. Uh, Burke goes free, but he just doesn't get released back into the slums of Edinburgh to get blinded. The authorities do manage to get his ass across the border in England, but then he disappears, probably because he drinks himself to death or something.
Or
Uh,
he was murdered as soon as he came across the border.
there are weird, rumors about that, but this guy was, a slum dweller
Yeah,
before. He probably just got to England and like so many, unfortunate working class people at the time just died a pauper's death.
yeah.
The kind of disturbing irony of all this is that Burke's body, after he is strung up, is used for dissection. And if you go to Edinburgh and go to the medical museum that's in the university, which I've been to, you can
Which,
see the skeleton. He's
yeah,
chilling.
I've been there too. I didn't know he was there. I must have missed that.
He is
Okay,
just
okay.
chilling there, larger than life. So he gets dissected. Dr. Robert Knox, who, let's be real, feeds into all of this.
Well,
Uh,
if I remember correctly, he got let off essentially.
his reputation is slightly stained, but there's no charge,
Right. Yeah, he faces no charges or yeah.
and
Okay.
he goes off and lives a rather comfortable life in London. Uh, and
What a f oh, goes
there's
to London.
no
Come on.
accountability there.
Come on.
The one thing which this affair does do is that it puts the Anatomy Act of 1832 on the books in the United Kingdom. So Parliament finally gets their act together, and they're like, okay, we have a problem with body
Well,
snatchers, and the body snatchers have now figured out that it's better to kill people than dig them up. Uh, so you get this Anatomy Act, which is part of the Charterist reforms, by the way, in the 1830s in Great Britain. Uh, but all the Anatomy Act really does, and it's funny because throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century, because this doesn't come off the books until like I think post Thatcher, it's like the 90s. Uh, Subsequent future British reformers, particularly in the Labour Party, would occasionally be like, this thing is problematic. And it's problematic for this reason. So it makes certain that you need a license, a piece of paper, in order to buy dead people. or obtain dead people. So doctors,
I
universities.
mean, that's not
uh,
crazy. Yeah, that's
but
not crazy.
here's the goddamn problem. So it like legitimizes it, it makes it professional. But remember what I said before. Whose bodies are they using anyway?
Oh,
Prisoners, it's
Mm.
orphans, it's people who, uh, etc. So
oh, now we got weird. Now we
The
got weird.
Anatomy Act of 1832 states you can still use condemned criminals, you can still use orphans, but it also includes patients that aren't that die but aren't taken away in hospitals.
And you said this was an English.
Yes,
Okay. Yeah.
prisoners and people who die in workhouses, or for a fee you could
Work. Oh,
for a fee that you'd be paid up front, you can sell your body or your dead relative's body to one of these licensed doctors. So what's the moral of the story? The rich motherfuckers win because all the Anatomy Act does is effectively legitimize the trade in poor bodies and
exactly. It
and
legitimizes you being poor and having nothing to give up.
and puts
Yeah.
the resurrection men out of business.
Ugh, yeah.
So that's the actual sort of history of the Burke and Hare case. Uh, but Cam, you already mentioned this. Burke and Hare, when you think of Scotland, Burke and Hare come up with Nessie and bagpipes and kilts and Tennant's lager, which I'm drinking tonight. It's very good. If you do not think they can brew lager,
Well, by the way, I have 8 tall boys of Ukrainian beer in my car for you, by the way.
we're gonna do a trade-off. Uh Burke and Hare entered not just Scottish popular culture, but British and I guess global popular culture.
Yeah.
And so I know it's because this has been the Let's Get to Know Scotland in the 19th Century segment of the program. Uh,
Yeah.
there's been a bunch of different film adaptations and literature and stuff. I'm wondering, Dina or Paul, before you watched tonight's film, what was your experience with Burke and Hare, like through the realm of popular culture? Have you seen any of the other cinematic adaptations? Have you read Robert Louis Stevenson's
They did one in
short
2010, I
story?
think, as well.
They did.
Um, yeah.
So I thought it was like Poor Things.
Yes. Okay. Why do you
Yeah.
think that? Because I wasn't necessarily going to go there, but I don't think
So
you're wrong at all.
I actually think the reading that you sent made me feel like it was more similar to Poor Things than the movie did. Um, but did anybody see Poor Things
I
here?
did.
You
Uh,
did?
yeah. Paul, Cam, have you seen it?
Oh,
No, I
sure.
don't know. Is that a TV show or a movie or?
Oh, it's a film that came out. Dina was about 2 or 3 years old now.
Yeah, I think that too. Yeah,
Yeah,
not that
about two
long ago.
years old. It's kind of like a retelling, and it's funny because I would argue Burke and Hare and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, that are almost contemporaries. That's the birth of modern horror science fiction. I think we
Yeah.
could or certainly the mad scientist subgenre. Uh,
Hmm.
Poor Things is a really class conscious and also very, uh, sort of a feminist reading of the old Frankenstein story. And
Okay. Okay.
the class elements, like how the rich, the professionals in this case, exploit the poor just because they can exploit the poor and there's really no fucking consequences.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
comes out very strongly in that film. I can't recommend that film highly enough. Uh, so
Oh,
yeah, that's
okay.
Dina, I'm so glad you went there in that respect because I think if you don't have Burke and Hare, maybe you don't have mad scientist movies, and maybe you don't have Poor Things,
No,
right?
I agree with you. Yeah, I think Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, and the
Excellent.
thing with Poor Things is like it's really different. I think it does lean more towards like a Frankenstein slash like feminist reading of it. But the relationship between I cannot remember her name, but the main character and Willem Dafoe's character, I felt like their relationship like as a pair was very similar to the reading that you sent, like how they described their relationship between Burke and Hare.
Is it
Uh,
Bella Baxter?
Yes,
yes,
yeah.
Okay.
yes. Uh, so I already teased at that. Robert Louis Stevenson, a good Scotsman, was fascinated by this. And the Burke and Hare case served as an inspiration for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, uh,
Yeah.
and a short story he wrote in 1884 called The Body Snatcher. Uh, and Dina, you're shaking your head, and I know exactly why. Uh, Burke and Hare entered the cinematic universe, and even though the events of this film take place after the events in the film that we're going to talk about, uh, there's an excellent film adaptation of Stevenson's The Body Snatcher, produced by Val Lewton and starring Boris Karloff, from the 1940s, which, for my money, might be the best horror film of the 1940s. I know, Dina, I assume you've seen that one.
No, I haven't.
Oh,
No,
really?
I haven't seen it.
Oh, dear God, no, you have to watch that movie. It was made by RKO the same time that Karloff did Isle of the Dead, which I know
I
also,
have seen that,
yeah,
yeah.
which I know has a special place in your heart because
Yes, it does.
it's Karloff, it's Greek, it's vampires. It's set during the Balkan Wars, which is amazing. Uh, The Body Snatcher. Then there was an earlier British film called, depending on where it came out, Horror Maniacs, which is a fucking stupid title. And
It's a really dumb title.
it is
Really
a
fucking
ridiculous,
stupid.
it's a horror maniacs, and or AKA the greed of William Hart. You're probably thinking, who the hell's William Hart?
That's also still not so much better.
So it was made in 1948 when the British film censorship uh was radically different from the time that the film that we're talking about was made. And it was a Todd Slaughter film, and Todd Slaughter was this kind of Britain's first sort of horror.
They they made the B horror movie films. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, I
yes,
know what you're
and
talking about.
and
Yeah,
we may do one of his films on the
yeah.
pod.
Yeah.
The one thing
Yeah.
I will say is those films are like, well, yes, Cam's expression is 100% accurate. They're extremely fucking British to the point that they're almost kind of hard to. It's a wonderful way to look at Britain at that time. So this is a Todd Slaughter film, which was written by John Gillian, who directed and wrote The Flesh and the Fiends. So the film that we're going to talk about is not Gillian's first rodeo with Burke and Hare. So he brought the script to the British film censors, and the British film censors were like, "You can shoot this movie, but you have to change all of the characters' names because it might upset people because we are Britain and this is 1948 and we are stuck in like the 20s." Uh, so the characters were renamed Hurt and something else. And I saw this film years ago. It's not particularly good, but it is interesting. I think, considering if we compare and contrast it to the film we're about to talk about. Uh, then in 1972, there was a film called Burke and Hare, which I rewatched within the last year and a half because it came out on Blu-ray. I really regret buying that Blu-ray. The only thing I have to say in my notes about that film is this film is bullshit. Don't see 1972's Burke and Hare. It's a sex comedy masquerading as a horror film. And here's the thing. I enjoy certain sex comedies. Italian sex.
It's fucking early days Scottish movie.
Yeah,
All right, so it's gonna be shit.
so Italian sex comedies are quite funny. I find them very
It's
Like
such a
good.
bad film, though. I know the exact film you're
But
talking about. It's
but
so bad.
British sex comedies are like entertainment for leering old men in Macintoshes. It just feels Italian sex comedies feel sexy. British sex comedies feel like don't go see that movie. Uh
No, it's bad. It's really bad. It's bad. It's bad. Like off the cuff, bad.
there's something from 1985 called The Doctor and the Devils, directed by Freddie Francis, who worked for Hammer and Amicus Films. We'll inevitably talk about him at some point during the podcast. And it starred Timothy Dalton as Robert Knox. Uh, Timothy Dalton, the most underrated James Bond ever, by the way. Jonathan Pryce as Hare, and Twiggy, right, as Mary McDonald. I saw this years ago as a horrible print. I am interested to revisiting it because I remember it being very good. And then finally, Cam, I think you mentioned in 2010, there was a sort of comedic riff on the Burke and Hare story, simply called Burke and Hare, starring Simon Pegg, Andy Sudeikis, and a very old Christopher Lee. Has anyone ever seen that one that came out in 2010?
I just heard about it today.
It's flawed.
I have.
It's flawed, but the
It's
Christopher
what you'd call cheap comedy.
yes, but the Christopher Lee scene is fantastic.
Yeah,
Uh, Christopher Lee plays the old guy from the Highlands, and this scene is in the movie we just watched. And he comes in, but like he plays this like drunk
yeah.
Scottish Napoleonic war vet who like talks in like rhymes and like nonsense. He's like a character. It's like a character from Lewis Carroll. Uh, so the movie itself isn't very good, but that scene is quite amazing, and it's Christopher fucking Lee, right?
It's
Um,
one of those movies you want to put on the background and like let it happen, sort of thing, and like you're not gonna get anything out of it, yeah, sort of thing.
and
It's simple pleasures.
and then of course there's the movie that The Flesh and the Fiends that we are finally going to dissect for you tonight. Uh, Very briefly, a little bit of background about the film itself. So, this film was made in 1960. That first film, Horror Maniacs, 1948. Britain, I've always said this, culturally, Great Britain was stuck in the 20s until the mid 1950s. Uh, and I think the catalyst for getting Britain out of the 1920s was decolonization, right? Modern fashion, rock and roll, and horror movies. In the early 1950s, 1951, in fact, the British Board of Film Censors changed the certification on films. Uh, and they released something which the logo is this podcast's Instagram logo of our Instagram page, because yes, we have an Instagram page, the X certificate. And when we think X-rated movies in the United States, we think other stuff. Uh, all this meant was it was any film that anyone over the age of 16 could go see. That seems like, okay, that's, restrictive, but it's not in this respect. But by lowering the age of these sort of films to 16-year-olds, you are opening up a new audience, particularly young people, teenagers, and there's a lot of them after the war because Britain and everywhere else got the baby boom too. Uh, these are teenagers with disposable income, so they will give you money. So there are butts in the theaters. And the other thing I think too is the X certificate not only builds an audience, it allows these smaller British film studios, the most, important, the most famous being Hammer, but there are plenty of others, to do things that just a couple years ago would have been unthinkable. And so in 1957, Hammer Films does The Curse of Frankenstein, which starred our star, Peter Cushing. Technicolor, Dayglow color blood, and that is like an atomic bomb because it literally blows up and changes everything. And so as soon as Hammer gets going, because that film and The Horror of Dracula made a crap ton of money, not just in the UK, but globally. All of these smaller British studios are like, okay, we have to get in on this boom, if you will. And so they get into the act. And so the film that we're going to talk about is kind of riding Hammer's coattails. But I'm glad I picked this film because it would have been easy just to do, start us off with one of the early Hammer films. But Hammer, even from the beginning and certainly at the end, even though those were cult movies, they were also, Hammer was always kind of sort of the establishment. Like the studio chair, James Carreras, eventually Sir James Carreras, right? He gets a fucking knighthood. And his aspiration was always to turn Hammer into like the British version of, Warner Brothers or something like that. They made their money making exploitation films, but they were really kind of an established film studio and with a kind of established film culture. And you see that maybe later in the podcast when we talk about films from like the late 60s and early 70s. The Hammer films of the late 50s were shocking. By 1968, I know Dina, you recently watched The Devil Rides Out.
Yes. Yeah, we did.
Which
Yeah.
is an awesome film with some great performances. But it's funny, that film, which is exclusively about devil worship, comes out in 1968, the same year as Rosemary's Baby. Yo, The Devil Rides Out is cool, but that's fucking twee compared to Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad I chose this film because even though Hammer kicks off this revolution, some of these smaller studios who didn't really give a shit about getting knighthoods, they could do a little bit more. They could take some more risks. And so we have to introduce the guys who brought this film to us, Robert Baker and Monty Berman, uh, who in the early 40s founded a film studio called Tempin. And then as soon as Hammer started doing their thing, was like, we're going to make a bunch of money. By the way, and Cam, you would sort of understand this. Both Baker and Berman grew up Jewish immigrants in the East End of London. So these guys are in charge of a film studio, but these guys, they make some good movies by default, but their main MO is we're doing this to make money. But we're also not beholden by any dreams of becoming mainstream, right? Because we're boys from the hood that have a little extra money and vaudeville's dying, so let's go into the motion picture business. So when Hammer does their thing, they poach Hammer's number one screenwriter, Jimmy Sangster, and he writes two films for them. The Blood of the Vampire, 1958, and Jack the Ripper, also from 1958. And you could tell that they're riding Hammer's coattails because in the credits, Jimmy Sangster, it's screenplay by Jimmy Frankenstein Sangster. Right, because they're like they're making that clear. Uh, they also released a really interesting science fiction film called The Trollenberg Terror from 1958, which is the title in America was called The Crawling Eye. I don't know, has anyone ever seen that? It's really quite good. It's interesting. You also get a drunk Forrest Tucker, which is also odd. Uh, but in 1960, they teamed up with John Gilling, who wrote and directed the film, to form something called Triad Films. I guess because it's Baker, Berman, and now Gillian. And they're gonna, again, riding Hammer's coattails. Word got out to them that Peter Cushing was suffering from hammer fatigue. He did Frankenstein, he did Dracula, he does Sherlock Holmes, he does The Mummy, and then he's going to be in The Man Who Could Cheat Death, and Peter Cushing is like, hell no, I won't go. You either raise my salary or I'm not doing like three movies for you a year. So Peter Cushing, already a name, is free, and John Gilliam, he's already written a screenplay about Burke and Hare. And now he can actually make that movie without changing their names to something ridiculous. And that's how this movie was birthed. So let's get into the movie itself and, the cast. But very quickly before we do so, though, has anyone ever seen another film directed by John Gillian before?
I don't think so.
So he later worked for
I don't,
Hammer.
yeah, I don't believe so either.
Paul and Cam, I know you're bullshitting me because I've been there while you've watched his movies. He later worked for Hammer and he directed two films that I absolutely adore. The Reptile from
Oh
1966
yeah. Okay.
and Plague of the Zombies, which might be my favorite Hammer film, which is the weird class war zombie movie, uh, set in Cornwall. He then went to Spain, and which we might talk about Spanish horror at some time, in the not too distant future. And he did a little film called The Devil's Cross in 1975. He also did a crap ton of TV work. Uh, so let's get into the film itself. Who wants to kick us off, and what about the film, be it a particular performance, a particular theme? Where do we want to begin the conversation?
Well, I'll say,
If
um, so as far as performances went, I thought that George Rose, is it Rose, not
yes.
Ross? Okay. And Donald Pleasance was amazing. I thought they both did an incredible job.
So when you see this film and he's all up on the DVD, the Blu-ray cover, he's all up on the poster art, it's Peter Cushing, right? And don't get me wrong,
But
I
it's
think,
not.
but it's not. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. George Rose and particularly Donald Pleasance steal the freaking show in new and unusual ways. And like I said, I think when we first started recording, if you can't think about Donald Pleasance as just Dr. Loomis, you really are missing out. And I know, Paul, you had, when we had spoken last Wednesday, uh, you had mentioned Pleasance's performance. Do you want to, share your thoughts about Pleasance's portrayal in the film? Oh, I think Paul stepped out really briefly. Well, we'll continue this. Dina, what about those two performances? And again, I really would like to zero in on Pleasance. Did you really uh did you found interesting or
No, well, one thing I said to Justin was like, it was actually scary. Like, I was actually scared. The
yes.
two of them were very convincing. I mean, the scenes, like every violent scene, the R word scene, and even just them um like strangling these people and suffocating them, like they're drawn out scenes. And usually in an old movie, they don't, like, you'll see that stuff depicted, but there's almost always like a quick cutoff. And I felt like that was not, like, they made you feel every second of that torture that those people were going through.
So there's two things in what you said that I would like to sort of piggyback on and highlight. And Paul's back, which is good because he said something last Wednesday that I had never thought about before. The first thing is, so Hammer is already doing their thing, and their films are in color, and they're violent. I mean, they're graphically violent. I mean, when I think of early Hammer, I think poor Christopher Lee getting his eyes shot out with a shotgun in The Curse of Frankenstein, and then, blood, fangs, red contacts in, Horror of Dracula. This film is not particularly gory at all. And right, it's not in color, it's black and white, which I think actually helps it. I would make the case that this is the more violent film because the level of violence is way more unsettling. Uh in so many ways. And Paul's back. Paul, we're talking about George Rose and Donald Pleasance and their performances. Last Wednesday, when we ran into each other at a function, you described Donald Pleasance's character in a way that I had never thought about before. Do you mind sharing that with
Yeah,
the
sure.
people?
Sorry, I'm going back and forth. My son's being just kind of a mess, so I'm dealing with that. He's fine. He's just being ridiculous. Um, well, so for me, the thing I noticed about Donald Pleasant's Hare's kind of costume was a couple things. Because so one thing I noticed was that he was wearing things in an attempt to kind of make himself look more elegant and upper class than he really was. The
So
top
yeah,
hat, the tails. He tried to have a watch at one point. He
he
was
buys a fucking waistcoat.
yes, and
The
then he
money
shows
he
it
used,
off.
yeah.
That's his
And
big spend. And then not only that, he has a cane. And I thought of him as kind of like a psychotic looking Willy Wonka. And the way Donald Pleasance is such a phenomenally underrated actor.
yes,
And in this performance, it's really something to watch how he kind of toys with this sort of behavior of like a soft spoken psychopath that attempts to be high minded and elegant, but is just crass and terrible and just merciless. And for me, the real clinching scene that he really portrays in the film is when he's egging Burke on to suffocate that one woman. And the camera is like dancing with him as he's covering the nose and mimicking how he wants him to kill this person. And it's such like in any other context, I feel like the scene could be kind of comical, like silly,
yes.
and it does kind of call on that sort of British style that was really popular with Vincent Spinelli and that sort of sort of crowd where it was like this weird like camera play, kind of comical, but it's killing someone, so it gets darker and creepier, and you're like, oh, like this is unsettling. So yeah,
So when you said a deranged or psychotic Willy Wonka,
openly psychotic
that
Willy Wonka.
yeah, that scene in particular. And by the way, I just throw this out now. The cinematography in this movie is absolutely outstanding.
Yeah,
Uh,
really good.
but what both you and Dina said, I think is a wonderful launching off pad to, you know, one of the sort of themes of the film because so Hare in this film, the Don Pleasance character, is clearly the brains behind the operation, but I have in my notes, I'm like, he's dressed up like a goddamn dandy, but he's still stuck in the hood, right? He dresses like a gentleman. There's this wonderful scene when him and Hare go in to deliver one of the bodies and they reek like booze. Uh and they're trying to make pleasantries with Cushing's character Dr. Knox to the point that the Don Pleasance is like, "Do you take the snuff, doctor?" And
Yeah.
Cushing's just like, "Nah, my cigars and brandy are upstairs, asshole. This is a business transaction. You stink. You gotta leave." Right. And again, he buys the waistcoat. He's got the cane, and while I was watching the film with Marie, over the course of the week, it occurred to us because it was like his character there's this thing that unfortunately oppressed people do. They have this tendency to mimic, usually in the worst ways, their oppressors. And so when I was watching the film this go around, I was reminded of a lot of conversations I've had, particularly in the early aughts, with a lot of my African American friends who used to say, I'm really concerned about the state of hip hop because the rappers aren't talking about the struggle. They're not talking about the hood anymore. They're talking about fucking champagne and Cavassier and things which that is nothing about us. uh, so there's that sort of mimicry. And there's also a really, going back to, when we're talking about the historical Burke and Hare, a very disturbing mimicry. Because my favorite scene in the film, and I think this scene is incredibly important, is when they're about to, well, take their first victim. Right, because the first body they sell is one of Burke's lodgers who drops dead. Oh, and by the way, going back to he's dressed up like a dandy and stuff. These are two working class guys who refuse to actually work. Right, when the lodger dies, they're all bummed out, and Donald Pleasance is like, uh excuse me, Burke's wife is like, you might have to go find a job. And
It's also very classic Scotland. Two working class guys that don't want to work but want the money.
yeah, exactly. And then
Pretty normal in our country.
and
Yeah.
Donald Pleasance is straight up like,
Yeah.
you working, you a landlord. And it's like, yeah, you and your
Yeah.
wife own a small, a tenement house. uh
But on the flip of the coin, we'll dig up bodies for money
Well,
illegally.
it's not
So,
just dig up, right? Because again, you mimic your oppressor. And look, Burke, Hare, they are they are perps, but they are also victims of this much larger
oh,
capitalist.
absolutely. They're victims of this where the upper class in Scotland that have been funded, obviously by England, create this medical school that is fantastic. And then the lower class are left to kind of deal with themselves. And again, this is what I kind of said to you earlier. Like, the fantastic part about it, the only reason that Burke and Hare are still in our history is because they took the time out of their day to be inventive, quote unquote, and be like, you know what? We can sell these dead bodies that no one's going to care about. And
Well,
we can get
and
some money off that and take our children off the fucking pay tab.
and this goes
And if
back.
anyone wants to argue with me about that, I will take them all 100 rounds for
You're
sure.
you're in good company. And this kind of, I wouldn't even say inventiveness, entrepreneurial, no, entrepreneurship. Wow, if I could speak fucking proper.
That's part of
Uh,
like our, yeah, yeah. I see
the,
what you're saying.
the
Our, yeah.
scene that sums up the whole movie is when they're getting the old lady Aggie liquored up at the Gin Palace.
Well,
And Burke says to Hare, "What are you doing with that old hag?" And Hare looks at him and he says, "That, my friend, is a capital investment."
investment. Yeah, yeah.
And what is that? And it's something what the businessmen say. That sums up the entire movie. Why are you getting this old street dweller liquored up? Well, her body, and the bodies of all of the others that they sell, that's a capital investment. You buy them drinks so that we can sell them for a profit. And again, that's capitalism 101. I'm sorry. In a profoundly warped,
Yeah.
disturbing way.
Could I
Uh
No, it is. It is.
could I real
But
quickly
it's
build
also,
up?
I would say, remember that it's very poor capitalism, like super poor capitalism.
well, yes, but
Like,
it's capitalism nonetheless, and the dehumanization of. But Paul, you had a point.
Well, so a couple of things have entered my mind as I read the article and watched the film. And a couple of things on this kind of topic I kind of picked out specifically regarding commodification and the
Yes.
professionalization of something that's already happened. So in that article, and it's well documented that even especially in Britain and elsewhere in the Western Hemisphere, Europe and et cetera, body snatching was already a thing where
Yes.
it was a common occurrence. And even going as far back as the Renaissance, a lot of the masters of art and sculpture participated in that themselves. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo.
To a certain extent, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Leonardo would sit with old people till they died and claim that he was their relative to take them home and dissect them. So he would have a better understanding of the anatomy. And
Yeah,
Michelangelo would
I
pay
think the
off,
difference was like the body snatching for medical research that wasn't accepted
but
was
it was
difference
medical
between
research.
like,
It was Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo both did medical research for what it was at its time, being
but it
able
was
to draw
accepted, right?
accurately the anatomy of humans, both in drawn and then especially with Michelangelo's case in sculpture. Um, but anyway, what I was trying to say was like body snatching was already something that was occurring, and the thing the article really brought attention to me was about how that practice was already being commodified in its security of the bodies, where you were
And
having
that
people who were building cages over graves, people
and that
who had locked tombs and stuff to prevent desecration. The,
slabs over the
the,
grave
the
so you
two things
can't
I kind of feel the Burke and Hare story bring to fruition is the fact that Burke and Hare are these Irishmen who are under this British Empire that is a foreign colonial empire, and they are now coming to a more closer heart of it in Edinburgh. It's still a different country, a different culture, but they're now closer to kind of the homebound, or at least the empire, the empirical center. And then they're especially at the empirical center of medicine at this time. And the thing that really brought attention to me in the article was about how suddenly anatomical surgery became compulsory
yes.
during the 1820s to be able to obtain a license as a surgeon. And that would create an overflow class, thus a demand for bodies. And so I think that Burke and Hare were just simply a part of a mechanization that was occurring naturally, and they capitalized on it better than some of their peers. And
Every
oh, and just one, and just the other thing is that like a point on that is that Knox could have been avoided this the whole time. It's noted that his first rival was offered a body by Burke and Hare, and he said, "No, I don't want this," and he suggested Knox. And so I feel like this could have happened to any doctor, and not to say that they were, put their morality on a pedestal. They certainly probably understood, or at least knew that this could have been a nefarious way these gentlemen got the bodies. But it seemed like this perfect storm of where a different type of commodification was coming about utilizing bodies. And they were just inhabiting what the empire was already doing on a mass scale in a more microcosmic way of just being like,
Well, at least my understanding was they were getting bodies when they were quote unquote accepted, but they weren't getting enough to,
meet the demand.
let's say, encourage, scientific, movement.
well, and
Um,
no, go ahead.
no, I mean that's quite literally, yeah.
But I think what Paul is saying is rather key here. It's yeah, you have the trade and all this, but what that article was sort of suggesting, I think what the film is sort of also getting at too, is this is the really disgusting, disturbing side of what capitalism just does generally, which is the commodification of all things and the commodification, in this case, of quite literally the flesh.
And what's the first purpose of their first victim? The first body they sell is to pay off a debt.
Yep.
It's all about
It's all about
capital.
commodities. This
We
this
need
movie
money.
is all about commodities, including the one. Well, there's two female characters, and I want to get into that. But one of them, their entire profession, let's face it, is the commodification of the flesh. So I think that's a really if I was like I said that one particular scene, why are you screwing around with Aggie? That's a capital investment. We're gonna get her liquored up so that we can make bank. Uh Paul, I want to go back to something because we've talked about Burke and the last thing I have in my notes about Donald Pleasance and Paul, Dina, I don't want you to feel left out here, but you're the only non-Irish American on the panel at the moment.
I'm not fucking Irish American. Are you kidding me?
Well,
Fucking
but
hell, mate.
uh,
Christ.
but you will get this.
I will get it, yeah.
I have
But
in
I'm
my
not Irish
notes.
American though.
Well, Irish, Scottish, you get my point. All I have in
So,
my
yeah.
notes is, my God, Donald Pleasance's character is Irish as fuck. The mannerisms,
The accent.
the sort of the gift of gab, as we call it, Paul, and the whole like, yeah, you have transgressed. And I think transgression's a very interesting point here because there's several characters that try to transgress class dichotomies. Burke and Hare being two of them, right? They enter into the basement of the doctor, only the basement. But they're offering him snuff and stuff like that. But you have this profoundly, again, madcap Irish Catholic Willy Wonka. And he's talking to, Dr. Knox, who, if he goes to church at all, is Calvinist, Calvinist, Calvinist. And he gets paid and he's just like, may the saints protect you. It's like, dude, he don't got no saints, homie. Like, this is so that's really all I have to, unless anyone wants to add anything else about the Burke and Hare.
Can I
Oh,
jump off that, Matthew, real quick?
yeah, go
So
ahead.
the two things in my notes revolve. First, I want to talk about the role of like religion, but specifically the role of non-belief at this time, or the rise of it as it was.
Well, I think okay, 'cause I think this is a great segue to talk about the Dr. Knox
But I
character.
also want to talk about the Irish thing secondly
Okay.
as well. But to talk about the um, the religious kind of connotation. So a big thing to note too is that like for there's a weird mixture at this point in the 19th century, in namely Western Europe and the United States, where for the first time in kind of recorded history, you're actually having the beginning of a rise of non-belief, meaning that at this point in the 1820s, 1830s, you have a rise of actual atheists, people who are starting to understand or believe that the world is not operated fully by some deity. 50, 70 years prior to this, it would have been illogical to think that the world wasn't governed in some way by some sort of force, deity, call it what you will. And I think that there's this strange kind of intersection we see in history at this point where, like, for example, the term resurrectionist really rung out to me. And I feel like it was a way to apply a religious tone to downplay desecration, where it's
Hmm.
not a body snatcher or a ghoul, it's a resurrectionist. It gives it a higher class. And to thus, people who still highly believe, i.e., at this time, especially Irish Catholics, which
Yep.
was a theocracy and everything but name. And
Well, and also part of your identity
entirely part of
in
your
a
identity, your culture,
foreign
your
land.
national
Yeah.
entirely. And then it also deified the practice and related to a higher place in society. So it was still a clever use of language to kind of elevate something that to most people at the time seemed rather awful and just like they talk about it too, where it's like you're separating the soul from the body. And there's that great scene where they're having that debate about, oh, you can't do that, a soul still inhabits a body. And Knox is like, well, do you see a soul? And that's the real split. That's a really important split in medical science. It's the
And
understanding of like, well, we dug in all these bodies, we can't find a soul. Like, okay, so is it there? What is a soul? And that question becomes much more elaborate, much more complicated. And thus you have this crazy rise in non-belief. So I see that there's this intersectional play with that a lot in this film, and how that kind of ties in with this, because Irish Catholic diaspora is willing to kind of negate that and just say, well, all right, well, fine. Like, yeah, no, it's a soulless body. Sell it. We get some crown, and that's it. We can
It
have our
is
drink, have our vest, and
it is merely material.
Have a
it's all
drink.
becomes
What?
material.
Ooh, that's
Exactly.
rough. Shit.
I think that's a wonderful jumping off point, Paul, to the Peter Cushing character of Dr. Knox. Uh, and we're not going to introduce sort of Peter Cushing because if you're watching a podcast or listening to a podcast on British genre films, you bloody well know who Peter Cushing is. Uh, I have in my notes, because it's funny, Cushing, who made, his name playing Baron Frankenstein in the Hammer films, said he was on record in saying that he based his Frankenstein portrayal on the historical Dr. Knox. Uh, I would hit back on that a little bit because you've ever seen any of the Hammer Frankenstein films. I think Cushing's Frankenstein is more Dr. Mengele than it is Dr. Knox. Uh, but I don't think he's totally wrong here because the first thing I have in my notes about Cushing is Paul, back to what you were talking about. He is freaking Enlightenment man and
Yeah.
like radical Enlightenment man. He is a man of logic, of reason. There is no goddamn soul. I cannot see it. I cannot touch it. He may not be an atheist, but he's definitely a deist. Like Homeboy created stuff and then just dipped out, and that's kind of how you do. And this is, however, where I do think the sort of, if you're going to make a connection with Frankenstein and make a connection with the Dr. Knox character and, previous mad scientists, you don't want to necessarily say totally immorality, but some quotes from literally the first 5 minutes of the film kind of set the tone here. When he's lecturing, he straight up tells his students, "Death is your friend, use it." Okay, that's interesting. Right? And also a
It's one
tacit
of the best things I've heard.
it's also a tacit admission of, yeah, you're going to be doing some nasty stuff and maybe dealing with some nasty people, but it's okay because the greater good, the progress of man, the progress of knowledge, the progress of science outweighs any of that stuff. And then, his assistant, the young medical student Chris Jackson, uh, when he gets his, I guess, can we call it a TA ship? Like teaching assistantship? One of the reasons why he gets that is because his grades aren't all that great. And, Knox's big critique is you're far too emotional to be a doctor. And then once you see, the film and, Cushing's character, it's like, yeah, no shit. According to Cushing, anyone with like half, a moral compass is too emotional to be a doctor. He is like enlightenment man to a T. And even though this film, if I do have a criticism of the film, is that there is towards the end of the film this little bit of like Dr. Knox doesn't get his comeuppance, but maybe there's like a lesson learned, like he's fucking Scrooge or some shit. Right, the scene with the little girl.
Yeah,
But
that was great.
at the same time, it's like when push comes to shove, this guy is driven by a worldview where it's science, it's logic, it's progress, which is kind of the classic mad scientist trope, right? I mean, whether it's Frankenstein, whether it's Dr. Jekyll, it's you mess with quote unquote nature because nature is something inherently that needs to be conquered and mastered, which again is total, enlightenment thought, right? You don't necessarily respect nature, you master it. And in a weird way too, going back to, capitalism may be the biggest monster of this movie. That's also the kind of logic of, capitalism, right? Uh nature, the natural world isn't something you live in harmony with. It's something to be exploited, it's something to be commodified. And I guess in this case, it includes human beings, bodies.
Yeah, I was gonna say earlier, but Paul said it way better than I could have ever said it, was
Don't sell yourself short, Dina.
No,
like
no.
even the flesh and the fiends, like I like that it kind of has a double meaning when you add the like sex workers being a part of this movie. You know what I mean? Like it's like the
Thank you.
fiends are still Burke and Hare, but they're also fiends because they're drunkards that hang out and whoremongers, you know what I mean?
That
And I was like, well, I felt like there's obviously got to be more like socially, like socioeconomically there with that meaning too.
apps. So I think that's a wonderful segue because we have to talk about the film only has two female characters, and they are both dramatically, diametrically, I will go full on Marxist on our ass. They are dialectically opposed. And the
Yes.
fact that the working class woman, Mary, is a sex worker, going back to this larger theme of the commodification of the flesh, the commodification of the body, she is engaged in work. It's different from Burke and Hare's work, but unfortunately, the logic is unfortunately disturbingly the same.
Yeah,
Right?
for sure.
Yeah, like she doesn't do this necessarily by choice. It is something that is a necessity.
Yeah.
And much like Burke and Hare too, she also transgresses these class boundaries because she decides to fall in love with T.A. Chris.
It's
And
yay,
with
Chris.
T.A. Chris, and that goes badly. There's the scene by the lake where Chris and Mary run into the other female character, which is Dr. Knox's niece, who couldn't be more different, right? She has just come back from Scotland because she's gone to mo fucking finishing school in mo fucking France. Uh, right? And she has the hots for Dr. Knox's assistant. And they just went on a boating ride. I don't know. Has anyone ever gone on a boating ride with their significant other?
No.
I just did this past weekend.
That isn't yes, Paul?
Oh, I did that this past weekend.
You are a better man than I am because
Do not do
that,
it.
that would
Don't do it.
end
Don't. No, don't.
disastrously at the cab. So Cam
Don't do
answers
it.
Cam
Don't do
answers
it.
my question right there. So they've just gone out on the boat. They're probably going to have a picnic or something. And there's T.A. Chris and his girlfriend, who happens to be a sex worker and from the lower strata. And the whole scene, this is what I mean. So, like, the Hammer films are in your face, bloody, gory. The violence in this film is gritty. It's in some ways more perverse. And I would argue too, this film, the kind of weird, for lack of a better term, social violence, because the awkwardness of that scene is so like, and it's like that this relationship between these two is going to end, and it's going to end badly.
But
Yeah.
you also saw that violence where it's perpetrated like that person can't ever be us, and it's
Yes.
kind of reflected on how their reaction is of like, oh, you're
I
with her, like, and
I
it's this whole thing
mentioned
of her
I
trying to be
mentioned
like, I can dress up like this too and act like them, but even if I do
but
this,
you're
that's not
never
good enough.
going to be them.
Yeah, exactly. I can
And
never be them.
that is
That's
just
class.
it. That's class at its heart. And like I said, when I was watching this movie, I thought about hip hop a lot because I keep thinking about, the Hare character acting like this weird gentleman dandy, and then the unfortunate, doomed romance between Mary and Chris. And like throughout in my internal, narration was like, not like us, not like us, not like us. Like it, and it's not going to work, and it can't work because the system makes it never work. So we covered a lot of ground already. Uh I would like to end with just some general thoughts about the film, what you like, what you didn't like. Uh Before we segue though, I do very briefly want to talk about censorship because right, this was an X-rated film. So 16-year-olds and their girlfriends could go watch the film in Britain and then go have a couple pints. Effectively, if you could drink beer, you could go see this film and films of its ilk. But one of the themes of this podcast is not just, picking apart the societal themes within the films themselves, but also thinking about like the world that these films were made in. And I know Cam, very early on, we had a discussion about this, and you were like, films as commercialization. And I was like, but nah, as an historian, I find that very interesting. Like, consumption interests me. So I think all of us saw the quote unquote continental version, right?
The one with boobs.
Yes, that's what I have down in my notes. A minute and a half of boobies and booty cheeks.
Yeah,
Uh,
I was actually really shocked.
yeah. So a lot of these studios, because in Britain you couldn't get away with bare flesh on the screen, particularly in 1960. But because these exploitation films are so commercial, a lot of studios started filming two different versions. Uh, and so the horror of Dracula, the version that we've all seen, is still not the complete version because they released a version in Japan where at the end of the film, Christopher Lee literally claws his face off. You couldn't show that in Britain, you couldn't show that in America. But the Japanese, it was like, cool, yeah. So we'll film this extra scene. So this movie is one of those examples of early British cinema filming even just an extra minute and a half so that the film could be distributed in markets, and in this case, particularly France and West Germany and Scandinavia, where you could show a little bit of flesh. Uh which they certainly did. And Paul, I think you made the great mistake that all loving dads that show their children make occasionally when you watch one of these movies, when you watched it with your son.
Yeah, I had the DVD you provided, but our DVD player just was kind of on the fritz, and it was I don't know. Someone's gonna. I think I actually had it in the wrong HDMI. I just didn't realize it. But he was really excited to watch it because I was telling him about it. Because
By the way, Paul's son Rainer is freaking dope. He
oh
is
yeah, he's a good dude.
he loves these movies, so you're doing
That's
God's work, my
awesome.
son.
He loves Peter Cushing. So when I told him Peter Cushing was in it, he was on board. And then we were watching it, and yeah, then sure, I watched the version on YouTube because with the DVD player working, I was like, all right, we'll find it on YouTube. And the version we watched was kind of an old print. It had like a couple of jumps, and I had to rewatch it. I had to when I got that DVD player finally working, I was like, oh, okay, there. At a friend's house, but yeah, no. At one point, when they're in the bar and it's all the guys getting drunk, it's like the nudity came up, and I was like, oh right, okay, shit. Like fast forward through this, but no, it was hard. It was honestly like the when you see stuff like that at this time when these sort of productions are happening, it's so relatively tame. It's kind of like,
Yes.
oh yeah, like okay,
And I think that the fact that's very interesting too, because again, we talked a little bit about censorship. The film, even the non booty cheeks version, uh, was too extreme for British censors in 1960. But just flash forward or rewind 12 years.
I was gonna say, Matthew, remember the BBC went through this weird point where they were just like full nudity for like 10 years. Like they just like they did a left turn hardcore.
Well, that comes because then you get a new X certificate in the early 70s that totally rewrites the rules. But, just 12 years earlier, you couldn't even make a Burke and Hare film with the names Burke and Hare.
Oh, you
You had to
couldn't
call them something.
you couldn't fart without getting like
Exactly.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it does show you, the
yeah,
sort of cultural shifts and what is permissive, what is not
yeah.
permissive. So before we wrap it up and give you a sense of what is on tap next, because something is coming up next, uh, let's just go around the panel and just give some general thoughts about the movie. Let's start with Cam. Cam, what did what's your overall impression of this film?
I
What did
mean,
you like?
my overall impression of the film obviously is it's a cultural standard for us. We've got two shitty Irish guys that immigrated to Scotland that were trying to make a better life for themselves that sold bodies. So, um, yeah, that's pretty much Scotland in a handbasket. So,
Okay, so you enjoyed the film because this story in particular is kind of indicative to the sort of
well,
Scottish experience,
it's got
Scottish.
a bit of everything. It's got the immigrant aspect, it's got the poor aspect of Scotland, it's got the rich aspect of Scotland. It's kind of got a weird like drop of each. Um, and us Scots are, we're very proud when people make something out of something they don't have. So, um,
Even
yeah,
if it's kind of, yeah. And I want to just harp on one thing that you said because the two of us, we had some drinks last Saturday afternoon and we got off into a
we had
tangent.
a few, yeah,
But
yeah.
it was something that both of us said. It's impossible to tell the Scottish story without the Irish story. And this
True.
film, I think, does address that in a very real way. Paul,
And
oh,
I, I'm not sorry. I'm sorry not to cut you off, but I think that's a really accurate thing. I think, there's two countries, two lands that have been oppressed for a little bit. One of us is more willing to be oppressed, and um, one thing I would say is, people like you, Matt, like, you see the situation sort of thing, and I'm glad you do. Um, but hopefully this ends at some point in time.
well, yes. I mean, both of us are, after all, Celtic fans, so we know where we fall on that part of the equation. Paul, what were your overall thoughts about the film? What did you like? What if there's something you didn't like?
Well, a couple things. First, regarding the movie, um, I thought the cinematography was really great. There was a lot of really interesting shots that kind of broke the fourth wall without trying to intend it to. Like the scene I mentioned earlier where Peter Cushing's dancing around, and then there's this really awkward scene where like they're at that picnic and he's flying out the blanket, and it's like the
Oh
blanket whips
yeah,
the camera
bruh.
and it pulls back like you're almost getting too close to these people. And it was almost in that way it was this weird camera play of like reminder of Class because they're classy people getting too close and it's like oh get back like oh sorry
Yep, there
that
are walls here.
that was an interesting observation. And then Cushion, of course, crushed it. He's just the whole time how he has his eye drooped. He's so erudite and really just like I think he was a little colder than his Frankenstein character in a way where Frankenstein could have these passions that fly off and scream, and Knox seemed always in control. Like even when the shit was hitting the fan, he had this Cushion could convey this gentleman who was very much like in control of like, no, I know how to. Don't worry, Like they'll understand. Like logic will apply, which is like an odd thing to say at this point in the 19th century. Like even today, that's a weird like really logic is going to apply to this.
But that goes back to Enlightenment man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then Donald Pleasance's performance was just incredible as well. Really an uncanny psychopath. But one thing that, so as I was watching this movie and I was thinking about the year 1960, I thought I wanted to kind of dig deeper into what was happening in 1960. And the thing that really spoke to me was the Irish aspect, because at the time, I just finished the book now. It's called "We Don't Know Ourselves" by Fintan O'Toole, and it's kind of a personal memoir where he goes through the years of his life, talking about the history of modern Ireland, and specifically the time he was born in '57 to the modern day, and discussing Ireland in the post-war era from a British context. There's some things that can apply where, at the time, Ireland was largely seen as a backwards kind of place in modernity. Just some statistics I was pulling from was that in rural Ireland, for example, 2/3 of homes had no electricity by the end of the Second World War. And then by 1965, 80% did. And then in 1961, a year after this movie was made, half of all houses outside suburban areas had no lavatories, indoor or outdoor. They either had a shared collective one or something akin to that.
Break out your entrenching.
75% of rural homes drew water from a well. Access to hot water was only from 12% of people. Ireland didn't have a TV station until 1961. They were beaten by Albania. And
yes.
It wasn't
the English
were
actively
getting aerials from the BBC and ITV, that the Irish government stepped up and said, well, we can't have a British influence in Ireland through our television waves. We got to cut that out. And then, they didn't join the UN until '55. They refused to be a part of NATO. So there was this whole sense that at this time this movie was made, that Ireland, even though it was a European nation and it was seen as a part of Western civilization in the British context, British occupying context, it was still seen as a backwater. And I feel like this film kind of reinforced some of those notions, where these two Irishmen are coming to Scotland and are, crude, crass. They use snuff. They drink too much. They have weird accents. They seem uneducated. They seem backwards. And it's like a thing where I was thinking about, I don't know if that was the film's intention to enforce those notions, but it was certainly something in the mind of a lot of people at the time of Ireland. And a really interesting fact, too, is that the 1961 census was the lowest population census in Ireland since the Great Famine of the 1840s. That the country sat at 2.5 million people. So during the 50s and 60s, a shit ton of Irish people were leaving Ireland. They were all going to England or America.
That is one of the. There's
also a big reason for that. There's a big reason for that, by the way.
I think that's one of the interesting things about the film, is that diaspora aspect.
Entirely, yeah.
There might be a reason. I don't know. This might be a crazy thought. The fact that the English were actively, the potatoes that the Irish were growing were taking them back to England and Scotland and Wales, and that was quite actually the reason of the famine.
Well, that was for the famine, but I'm talking in the 1960s, it was simply a fact that there was no Irish industrial infrastructure.
And
there were no jobs.
Yes, and the Ireland actively tried to create an industrial infrastructure. They actively tried to do that. They created what they called work programs.
But that was later, Cam.
In the 60s. What was big in Ireland, specifically through the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and namely up until really the 90s, was beef. beef with
Well,
Joe the
the
King in Ireland.
but Kim, see, this goes back to Ireland in the 60s looks a lot like Ireland while it was still part of the British Empire because the
Mhm.
economic relationships between the core and the periphery are still the same. And so if you're an Irish immigrant or first generation Irish Brit and you're watching this film in a theater in Liverpool, in Manchester, in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, perhaps, or Boston,
Yeah,
in New York, I think what Paul's trying to say is this film may resonate with the audience on a very real way because even though the film in some ways is reinforcing these stereotypes about Irishness, that we're drunks because we're Irish effectively, you know, uh,
well,
but
there is also something to be said about that too, though, I will say.
I think what is being said is British neo-imperialism, and again, how the film. Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. It's how the film would be received by both
entirely.
British
Yeah,
and Irish audiences. Like,
especially
yeah,
Irish. You hit the nail on the head where
the
it's
diaspora.
Irish diaspora in
Yeah,
Glasgow or Manchester or Liverpool watching this film would perhaps, I don't know,
how
it
are
would have a
they
mixed.
perceiving themselves
Exactly, yeah.
through the British lens in a very real sense in this case?
Considering where Ireland was
Yeah,
at that time in
yeah,
relation
Yeah.
to
and in a
the
way,
fallen British
it's
Empire.
a film about history, but it's also a film in some weird ways about the present.
Exactly, yeah.
Yes. I think that's what because
Okay.
yeah, Cam, because we all know Britain England's the bastard here, right?
Yeah, England's the bastard. They're
But
the ones who are
it's
fucking
how these things
invading
play,
everyone's
Always has
shit.
been.
but it's how these things play out and how, so yeah, Paul, I think it's been a bit since I watched this one, and
Okay.
the Irishness or the Irish sort of question in it is something that stuck out for me this go around as well.
Man, yeah.
Like again, I kept thinking, not that my great grandfather from County Cork via Liverpool, well, Liverpool via County Cork was, murdering old street women. But there were weird like aspects of Donald Pleasance's performance where I was like, oh shit, that's my great grandfather. Like in a kind of more like some of the mannerisms, some of the sayings, I'm like, yeah, that seems like weirdly comfy, but at the same time, yeah, how does it play out in terms of is this a stereotype? Like what does the audience think?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah. And so first of all, I'll apologize. I'm sorry. I get real defensive, I'll say. So, sorry for that, Paul. Oh, everything's
Oh, that's no
frozen.
trouble.
it's all right. Dina, last but not least, your thoughts about the film. Uh what did you like? What didn't you like?
I liked it. I thought it was cool. I like the like gothic elements to it. I like in its style, like the way it looked, and obviously like the subject matter. Um, the social commentary I thought was cool. Like if anything, I'm more interested to look into the history um at that certain time, like of just grave robbing in general. Um, and I think again, like I love the angle of the body commodification. I like that they added the sex workers in there as like, another conversation that you can have, which is the same. And also like what it's this the concept of like coercion almost, like how poor people and women in general are coerced into doing really, I mean, I don't want to say sex work is horrible, but doing things that could potentially be harmful to you, like your psyche, your body, whatever, in order to make money. Because if you don't have money, you can't survive. So, and I think that also is an interesting um, criticism of capitalism that I think that the movie portrayed, if that makes sense at all.
That I that I think is at the heart of the film, and
Yeah.
think I think those two stories, the resurrectionists and the sex worker, are two sides of the same coin in a
Exactly.
weird
Yeah.
way. And that ordinary capitalism's greatest crime is that it makes ordinary people like you and me have to make really difficult and potentially really shitty
Yeah, because
decisions.
it's not a decision. It's like you just have
Yeah,
to do
you
something if
have
you're
to do
desperate.
something or you don't eat. And the system, the system itself and the inherent violence in the system makes it sort of okay. And that's where I think, back to Paul's point about the portrayal of Cushing's portrayal of Dr. Knox as the sort of impediment of, Enlightenment man. He doesn't really care where the bodies are coming from anyway. So
Yeah.
why not kill Aggie? She's just a capital investment.
And one more thing for Paul and Cam. I think it would be fun for you guys to see Poor Things now, having seen this. Just for like Paul, especially like the way that you like kind of view the film like artistically. It's so you can see the influence, I think, of this of the Flesh and the Fiends to Poor Things, just aesthetically, and the way that it depicts Edinburgh, which I thought was beautiful. Like I feel like it was almost shot for shot the same in some at some moments. But yeah, I liked it. It was cool.
I've
And
seen
correct.
Poor Things, but it's been a minute.
No, I pre
Oh, sorry. I
I
thought you said
Oh
you
no,
did
no,
it.
but you're right. There is something now that you mention it about. It's kind of an interesting relation when you look at Willem Dafoe's doctor character and Cushing's Knox,
oh,
specifically the facial
I
deformity.
was just about to say, it just
Yeah.
Yeah,
occurred to me
and
both of
the
them
way they're
have the.
very calm and even toned. Yeah,
I was just say, I
Like
just.
Willem Dafoe is like the benevolent version of it, you know, like
yeah.
Yeah.
he's a monster and he's a mad scientist, but like I think he does really care for Bella and it's his creation, but it's his baby. And but you
interesting.
don't get that with Knox.
Do you
Whereas
think,
Cushing's doc.
question for you, do you think like, well, awkward, I guess. Do you think he embodies kind of the like Scottish spirit when he's there in Edinburgh, like, or is it more of like a Hollywood situation?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't
Okay.
really know like what the Scottish spirit means per se. Like, I
Okay.
mean, like as far as the way that Scotland or Edinburgh is depicted in Poor Things, I feel like it looks so like Yorgos Lanthimos was very clearly inspired by The Flesh and the Fiends to me. And the way that he portrays Edinburgh is very similar to the way that it's portrayed in the movie. So I don't know about like the identity of the Scottish people per se. I mean, maybe I'd like to hear what you had to say if you watched it and you could tell me.
Well, I mean, I lived and grew up there. Um, I haven't seen any of those films. I literally as I was wondering was if the next thing that was going to come out was going to be kind of based in there and if they were going to take Edinburgh into account.
Well,
I'm not sure.
the film is set in Edinburgh. That's the setting. So, back to your point, though, and Dina's point, I think it does a very good job of talking about and portraying the sort of social economic hierarchies in the city
Okay.
at that time. And yeah,
Okay.
I only just now put two and two together. Defoe's character in that film bears an uncanny resemblance.
I don't know how I don't know about this film. I'm gonna have to watch this tonight.
It is worth your time, Ken. It is
Is it?
definitely
It's
worth
half
your
decent.
time. It's beyond half.
Okay.
It's one of the better movies made in the last 2 or 3 years.
All right. All right.
Yeah, it's something you want to watch.
There's also a
Okay.
book.
Yes, and there is the
Oh,
book.
oh.
Uh so
Oh.
I think that went really well. We went a little later than we normally will, but this is the first episode. We had a lot of ground to cover. Uh, I hope you all enjoyed this. Uh, for Dina, Cam, Paul, and me, El Jefe,
Mhm.
Professor Matt. Uh, this is the Don't Go Out Onto the Moors podcast, and we will be back with you for a holiday episode. That's right. Uh, Paul picked the absolutely outstanding Cash on Demand from
Oh,
1960.
hell yeah.
Great
Might
movie.
be might be the Hammer's version of A Christmas Carol without actually being the Christmas Carol.
Mhm.
So we will reconvene in a couple months with that, and it's a film that I absolutely enjoy. So we'll be with you in a couple months. We have an Instagram page, we have a Facebook page. We may eventually have a Facebook group if enough people like give a shit. We'll see where that transpires. But anyway, have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful evening or day wherever you are. And we'll be back with you guys in a couple months. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you guys.